The morning sun cast long shadows across the quiet streets of Pinewood, Colorado, a town where everyone knew their neighbors, and the most exciting event of the year was the Autumn Harvest Festival. Marcus Thompson stood outside the fire station, coffee in hand, watching the amber light paint the Rocky Mountains in the distance. He had been a firefighter for 15 years, and nothing in his training could have prepared him for what was about to unfold. The emergency call came at 6:47 a.m., a frantic voice reporting that someone was attacking people at the Riverside Diner downtown. Marcus and his crew rushed to the scene, expecting a bar fight or perhaps a domestic dispute, but what they found would shatter their understanding of reality forever. The diner's windows were smashed, and inside, a man covered in blood was hunched over a body, tearing into flesh with his teeth. The creature that had once been Harold Simmons, the friendly mailman, turned toward them with milky white eyes and released a guttural moan that made Marcus's blood run cold. Rebecca Walsh had just started her shift at Pinewood General Hospital when the first victim arrived. The woman's arm was mangled, deep bite marks showing exposed muscle and bone. She came out of nowhere, the victim gasped between sobs. "Mrs. Patterson from next door, she just attacked me." Becca cleaned and dressed the wound with practiced efficiency, but something felt wrong. The bite victim's temperature was rising rapidly, and her eyes had begun to glaze over. Within 30 minutes, the woman's heart stopped. Becca called for the crash cart, but before they could begin resuscitation, the woman's eyes snapped open, now clouded and vacant, and she lunged at the nearest orderly with inhuman strength. Chaos erupted in the emergency room as more victims flooded in, and Becca realized with growing horror that each person who died from the bites was coming back as something else, something hungry and relentless. Across town, Tyler Jenkins was under the hood of a Chevy pickup at his auto shop when his phone exploded with emergency alerts. The 24-year-old mechanic wiped his greasy hands on his coveralls and read the messages with disbelief. "Stay indoors. Lock all doors and windows. This is not a drill." He walked to the shop's entrance and looked out onto Main Street, where people were running and screaming. A group of shambling figures pursued them, moving with jerky, uncoordinated movements but terrifying determination. Tyler recognized one of them as Mr. Bradley, who had brought in his sedan just yesterday for an oil change. Without thinking, Tyler slammed down the garage door and locked it, his heart pounding as the sounds of chaos grew louder outside. David Reeves, a Pinewood police officer for 8 years, was trying to maintain order at the town square, but the situation was deteriorating faster than anyone could comprehend. His radio crackled with desperate calls from all over town, reports of attacks, deaths, and something impossible, the dead rising and attacking the living. He fired warning shots into the air, trying to disperse the growing crowd of infected, but they didn't respond to commands or threats. When one lunged at him, he had no choice but to fire. The bullet struck its chest, but it kept coming. Only a headshot finally brought it down. David's training had taught him to protect and serve, but now he was faced with an enemy that couldn't be arrested or reasoned with. Grace Mitchell, a 16-year-old high school junior, was in history class when the principal's voice came over the intercom, ordering an immediate lockdown. Through the classroom window, she could see people running across the school grounds, chased by figures that moved like broken puppets. Her teacher, Mr. Harrison, tried to calm the students, but panic spread quickly. Grace pulled out her phone and called her parents, but the lines were jammed. She felt tears sting her eyes as the reality of the situation set in. Something terrible was happening, and she was trapped. The sound of breaking glass echoed from somewhere in the building, followed by screams. Grace and a handful of students pushed a desk against the door as shadows moved past in the hallway, and she knew that their ordinary lives had ended. Survival was all that mattered now, and somehow, in the chaos and terror of this impossible nightmare, she would have to find the strength to endure what came next. The Pinewood General Hospital had transformed from a place of healing into a war zone within 2 hours. Rebecca Walsh barricaded herself in the medical supply room with 3 other nurses and a doctor after the emergency room was overrun by infected patients. The screams had finally died down, replaced by an eerie shuffling and moaning that echoed through the corridors. Becca's hands trembled as she inventoried their supplies, bandages, medications, surgical tools, but nothing that could explain or stop what was happening. Dr. Nathan Graves, a veteran physician in his 50s, sat with his back against the wall, his white coat splattered with blood. "I watched them die," he whispered, his voice hollow. "They died, and then they came back. This isn't a disease. This is something else entirely." Through the small window in the door, Becca could see shadows moving past, the infected drawn to any sound or movement. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister who lived across town. "Where are you? Are you safe?" Becca typed back quickly, "Trapped at hospital. Don't come here. Stay away from anyone who's sick." She knew they couldn't stay in this room forever, but venturing out into those hallways meant facing dozens of those creatures, and the thought paralyzed her with fear. Marcus Thompson and his fire crew had managed to get back to the station, but not everyone made it. 2 of his men had been bitten during the chaos at the diner, and Marcus had made the hardest decision of his life. He'd left them behind. The guilt ate at him, but he'd seen what happened to those who were bitten, and he couldn't risk bringing the infection back to the station. Now, he stood in the apparatus bay with 5 other firefighters, watching news reports on the small television mounted on the wall. The footage showed similar outbreaks in Denver, Colorado Springs, and cities across the country. The reporters were calling it everything from a virus to biological terrorism, but the result was always the same: the dead were rising, and civilization was crumbling. Captain Roy Stevens, a grizzled veteran with 30 years of service, turned off the television and addressed the group. "We've got supplies here, water, some food, and the building is solid. But we're first responders, and there are people out there who need help." Marcus nodded, knowing what had to be done, but also knowing that saving others might cost them their lives. They began gearing up, checking equipment, and preparing for a rescue mission that had no training manual and no guarantee of success. Tyler Jenkins watched from his auto shop window as the street outside descended into absolute chaos. Cars crashed into storefronts as panicked drivers tried to escape the growing horde of infected. He saw Mrs. Chen, he corrected himself, Mrs. Henderson from the bakery being pulled down by 3 of those things, her screams cut short in a way that made his stomach turn. Tyler forced himself to look away and assess his situation. The shop had tools, some supplies, and a reinforced structure, but it was isolated. His phone rang, startling him. It was his younger brother, Kevin. "Tyler. Thank God. I'm at the community center with about 20 people. We're trying to organize, but we need supplies and someone who knows how to fortify this place. Can you make it here?" Tyler looked at the chaos outside, calculating the 8 blocks between him and the community center. "I'll try," he said, grabbing a crowbar and a toolbox. "Barricade the doors and don't let anyone in who's been bitten." "I mean it, Kev. No exceptions." He hung up and took a deep breath, knowing that stepping outside could be a death sentence, but his brother needed him, and Tyler had never backed down from family. David Reeves fired his last round into the head of an infected and felt his pistol lock back on an empty magazine. Around him, Main Street was a nightmare of abandoned cars, bodies, and shambling figures that had once been his neighbors and friends. His partner, Officer Jennifer Cole, was down to her last magazine as well. "We need to fall back to the station," she shouted over the chaos, but David shook his head. "The station's overrun. I heard it on the radio before we lost contact. They were cut off, low on ammunition, and surrounded." Then, through the smoke and chaos, David spotted the fire station 3 blocks away, its bay doors still intact and figures moving inside. "There," he pointed. "We make a run for it. Stay close and don't stop for anything." Jennifer nodded, and they sprinted through the carnage, infected reaching for them from all sides. David's lungs burned, his legs pumped, and he prayed they would make it, Because in this new world, every second counted, and death was always just one bite away. Grace Mitchell huddled in the darkened classroom with 7 other students, listening to the sound of something pounding on the door. Mr. Harrison had turned into one of those things 20 minutes ago, after being bitten while trying to help another teacher in the hallway. Grace had watched in horror as the transformation took him, his skin turning gray, his eyes clouding over, and his humanity draining away until only hunger remained. She and another student, a football player named Jake Morrison, had managed to push him out and barricade the door, but now the infected were everywhere in the school. Grace's phone was nearly dead, but she'd managed to see one last message from her father, "Coming to get you. Stay hidden. I love you." She clung to that message like a lifeline, knowing that her dad, a construction worker who was strong and resourceful, would move heaven and earth to reach her. But as the pounding on the door grew more insistent and the moans grew louder, Grace wondered if anyone could survive what was happening outside these walls, and whether her father would arrive in time, or if she would have to find her own way out of this nightmare. Marcus Thompson and his team burst through the fire station's side door just as David Reeves and Jennifer Cole came sprinting down the street, a mob of infected close behind them. "Inside, now!" Marcus shouted, providing cover as the 2 officers dove through the opening. Roy Stevens and 2 other firefighters slammed the door shut and braced it with a heavy tool cabinet as bodies crashed against it from the outside. The metal door shuddered but held. David bent over, gasping for air, while Jennifer checked her weapon, 1 magazine left, maybe 8 rounds. "Officer David Reeves," David managed between breaths, extending his hand to Marcus. "Thanks for the save." Marcus gripped his hand firmly. "Marcus Thompson. How bad is it out there?" David's expression darkened. "The whole downtown is gone. The police station fell within an hour. We're the only law enforcement left in this sector." The group gathered in the apparatus bay, a mix of firefighters and police officers, and Marcus realized they were no longer just emergency responders. They were survivors, and if they wanted to stay alive, they needed to think beyond just holding this building. "My crew at the hospital," Jennifer said suddenly, looking at her phone. "I've been getting texts from someone there, a nurse named Rebecca. They're trapped but alive. If we can reach them, we'd have medical personnel and supplies." Marcus nodded. "We're going to need both. But first, we secure this location and figure out exactly who else is out there and where they are." Rebecca Walsh jumped as her phone vibrated with a new message. It was from a number she didn't recognize. "This is Officer Jennifer Cole, Pinewood PD. Are you still secure at the hospital?" Becca's fingers flew across the screen. "Yes. Supply room, 3rd floor, east wing. 4 of us. Running low on food and water. Infected everywhere." The response came quickly, "Sit tight. We're organizing a rescue. How many infected on your floor?" Becca peered through the door's window, counting the shambling figures in the hallway. "At least 15 visible. Probably more in the patient rooms." She turned to Dr. Graves and the others. "Someone's coming for us. We just need to hold out a little longer." But even as she said it, the sound of splintering wood came from down the hallway. The infected were breaking through doors, searching for prey, and it was only a matter of time before they found this room. Dr. Graves stood up, his face set with determination. "We can't just wait. We need to create a distraction, draw them away from this area, and make a path for whoever's coming to rescue us." Becca knew he was right, but the thought of intentionally attracting those things terrified her. Still, sitting and waiting meant certain death. "Okay," she said, steeling herself. "Let's figure out a plan." Tyler Jenkins moved through the back alleys of Pinewood like a ghost, staying low and quiet, his crowbar gripped tightly in his right hand. He'd made it 2 blocks from his shop when he encountered his first infected up close, old Mr. Patterson, who used to complain about every repair bill but always tipped well. Tyler had no choice but to swing the crowbar, and he tried not to think about the sound it made or the fact that he'd just killed someone he'd known his whole life. 2 more blocks to go, and the streets were getting worse. He ducked behind a dumpster as a group of 5 infected wandered past, their movements jerky and uncoordinated but relentless. When they passed, Tyler ran across the street and nearly collided with a woman emerging from a doorway. She raised a baseball bat defensively, then lowered it when she saw he was human. "Jesus, you scared me," she gasped. Tyler recognized her as Amanda Price, who worked at the bank. "Are you alone?" she asked. Heading to the community center, Tyler replied. "My brother's there." "You?" Amanda nodded. "Same place. I heard they're gathering survivors. Safety in numbers, right?" They moved together through the devastated streets, watching each other's backs, and Tyler felt marginally safer having someone else with him, even though he knew that in this new world, numbers could either save you or get you killed. Grace Mitchell made her decision when the classroom door began to crack under the relentless pounding. "We can't stay here," she said to Jake Morrison and the other 5 students huddled in the corner. "There's a fire escape outside the window on the west side of the building. If we can reach Mr. Palmer's chemistry lab, we can get out." Jake, who had been mostly silent since everything started, looked at her with wide eyes. "That's 3 classrooms down. The hallway's full of those things." Grace pulled open a cabinet and grabbed a pair of scissors, the closest thing to a weapon available. "Then we go through the ceiling. The drop panels lead to the crawl space above. We move quietly, find the lab, drop down, and get out." It was desperate and dangerous, but staying meant becoming trapped when that door finally gave way. Another student, a girl named Melissa Torres, nodded in agreement. "She's right. We have to try." Jake grabbed a desk leg he'd managed to unscrew and nodded. "Okay. Let's do it." Grace climbed onto a desk and pushed up one of the ceiling tiles, revealing the dark space above. She pulled herself up, her arms shaking with effort and adrenaline, and reached down to help the others. Behind them, the door cracked further, and dead hands reached through the opening, grasping at empty air where their prey had just been moments before. The fire station had become a command center in the span of 3 hours. Marcus Thompson stood over a street map of Pinewood spread across the hood of Engine 7, marking locations with a red marker as information came in from survivors across town. David Reeves coordinated communications, his police radio picking up scattered transmissions from other survivors. "We've got confirmation of at least 40 people at the community center on Maple Street," David said, circling the location on the map. "Hospital has 4 survivors trapped on the 3rd floor. The high school's status is unknown, but we're getting reports that some students might still be alive inside." Marcus studied the map, calculating distances and risks. "We can't save everyone at once. We need to be strategic." Jennifer Cole joined them, her expression grim. "I vote we hit the hospital first. Medical personnel and supplies are critical for long-term survival. Plus, it's only 6 blocks from here." Roy Stevens shook his head. 6 blocks through infected territory with no guarantee we can even reach them. The community center has 40 people, that's a significant group that could help us establish a real stronghold." The debate was interrupted by a new voice on the radio, young and frightened. "This is Grace Mitchell at Pinewood High. If anyone can hear this, there are 8 of us who made it to the chemistry lab. We're trapped. The school is completely overrun. Please, if someone's out there, we need help." Marcus and David exchanged looks. The high school was 12 blocks away, the farthest point from their location, but leaving kids to die wasn't an option either of them could accept. Grace's hands shook as she held the emergency radio she'd found in Mr. Palmer's chemistry lab. The room was a treasure trove: chemical supplies, emergency equipment, and most importantly, a fire escape that led to the student parking lot. But the parking lot was crawling with infected, at least 30 of them wandering between abandoned cars. Jake Morrison stood watch at the door while Melissa Torres and the other students gathered anything useful: bottles, chemicals, cloth for makeshift weapons and distractions. "Did anyone respond?" Jake asked, and Grace shook her head, fighting back tears of frustration and fear. Then the radio crackled to life. "Grace Mitchell, this is Marcus Thompson with Pinewood Fire and Rescue. We hear you. What's your exact location in the school? Grace nearly sobbed with relief. West Wing, 2nd floor, chemistry lab. There are 8 of us, all students. The parking lot exit is blocked by infected. A pause, then, sit tight. We're putting together a rescue plan. It might take a few hours, but we're coming for you. Stay quiet, stay hidden, and stay off the radio unless it's an emergency. We don't want to draw attention to your location. Grace acknowledged and turned to the others, hope flickering in her chest for the first time since this nightmare began. Someone's coming, she said. We just have to hold out a little longer. Tyler Jenkins and Amanda Price reached the community center just as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. The building was fortified with furniture piled against windows and doors, and armed guards, residents wielding whatever weapons they could find, stood watch on the roof. Tyler pounded on the front door, and after tense moments of scrutiny through a peephole, the door opened just wide enough for them to slip through. Inside, the gymnasium had been converted into a refugee camp with families huddled in groups, children crying, and people nursing injuries. Kevin Jenkins rushed forward and embraced his brother. You made it. I wasn't sure you'd get through. Tyler gripped his younger brother tightly, then surveyed the scene. Who's in charge here? Kevin pointed to a woman organizing supplies near the stage, Linda Vasquez, the former mayor who had lost the last election but clearly still had leadership instincts. Tyler approached her. I'm a mechanic. I can help fortify this place, reinforce the doors and windows, maybe rig up some early warning systems. Linda looked him up and down, then nodded. We need all the help we can get. We've got maybe 6 hours before it gets dark, and these things seem more active at night. Whatever you can do to make this place more secure, do it. Tyler rolled up his sleeves and got to work, grateful to have a purpose beyond just running and hiding. Rebecca Walsh listened to the radio chatter between the fire station and the high school, her hope renewed. If they were planning to rescue students, surely they would come for the hospital survivors too. Dr. Graves had successfully created a distraction using a rolling force stand loaded with metal trays that they'd sent crashing down the opposite hallway. The infected had swarmed toward the noise, giving them a brief window of opportunity. Becca and the other nurses had managed to relocate to a more secure room, the surgical supply closet with a reinforced door and no windows. It was cramped with 4 people, but it was safer. We need to make contact with whoever's coordinating rescues, Dr. Graves said. Let them know we've changed locations. Becca pulled out her phone and texted Jennifer Cole's number with their updated position. The response came within minutes. Good thinking. Rescue team being assembled now. ETA approximately 4 hours. Be ready to move fast when we arrive. 4 hours felt like an eternity, but Becca allowed herself to believe they might actually survive this. She checked their supplies, enough water for maybe another day, some protein bars someone had stashed in a locker, and more medical equipment than they could possibly carry. When the rescue team arrived, they would need to move quickly and efficiently, taking only what was essential. Becca began making a mental list, preparing for the moment when they would have to run for their lives through a hospital full of the dead. Marcus Thompson checked his gear one final time as darkness began to settle over Pinewood. The rescue team consisted of himself, David Reeves, Jennifer Cole, and 2 firefighters, Pete Walsh and Danny Cruz. They had 2 vehicles, a fire engine that could plow through obstacles and provide elevated visibility, and a police cruiser for speed and maneuverability. The plan was simple but dangerous: hit the hospital first since it was closest, extract Rebecca and her group, then use their medical expertise for the more dangerous high school rescue. Radio silence unless absolutely necessary, Marcus instructed. We don't know if sound attracts them more at night, and we can't afford to find out the hard way. The team loaded up with every weapon they could find: axes, crowbars, a hunting rifle Roy had in his locker, and their remaining ammunition. As the engine rumbled to life, Marcus looked back at the fire station, wondering if they would all make it back alive. Roy stood in the doorway, giving a solemn nod. Someone had to stay behind to hold the fort, and the old captain had volunteered. The engine pulled out into the street, its headlights cutting through the gathering darkness and illuminating the nightmare that Pinewood had become. The streets were worse at night. Infected wandered aimlessly, but the moment the fire engine's lights hit them, they turned with disturbing synchronization and began moving toward the vehicle. "They're definitely attracted to light and sound," Jennifer observed from the passenger seat, gripping her pistol tightly. Marcus accelerated, the heavy engine pushing aside abandoned cars and knocking infected out of the way. Bodies tumbled across the hood and fell beneath the wheels, but Marcus forced himself not to think about who they had been. They were 2 blocks from the hospital when they encountered a massive pileup. Cars crashed and stacked at an intersection, completely blocking the road. "We go on foot from here," David said, and the team dismounted, forming a tight defensive formation. Pete carried a Halligan bar, Danny wielded a fire axe, and they moved through the darkness like soldiers in enemy territory. The hospital loomed ahead, its windows dark except for emergency lighting that cast eerie shadows. The main entrance was blocked by a mass of infected, at least 50 of them crowding the doors. "Side entrance," Marcus whispered, leading them around to the ambulance bay. The doors were shattered, and infected roamed the emergency room beyond, but there were fewer of them. "Stay tight, stay quiet, and aim for the head," David instructed, and they moved inside. Rebecca Walsh heard footsteps in the hallway, different from the shuffling drag of the infected. These were purposeful and deliberate. She pressed her ear to the door and heard a voice whisper, "3rd floor, east wing." "We're close." Her heart leaped. She turned to Dr. Graves and the others. "They're here," she mouthed silently. Carefully, she unlocked the door and cracked it open, peering into the dark hallway. 5 figures moved toward them, flashlights cutting through the darkness, and behind them, infected were beginning to notice the intrusion. "Here!" Becca hissed, waving her hand. Marcus spotted her and the team rushed forward. "How many are you?" he asked quickly. 4, Becca replied. "We've got supplies packed." Marcus nodded. "Take only what you can carry and run with. We move fast and we don't stop. Everyone understand?" They nodded, grabbing their bags of medical supplies. The team formed a protective circle around the hospital survivors and began moving back toward the stairwell. An infected nurse lunged from a darkened patient room, but Danny's axe caught it in the skull, dropping it instantly. They reached the stairs and began descending, but the sounds of their movement had awakened the horde. Moans echoed through the stairwell from below, and shadows began climbing toward them. "Up! Go up!" David shouted, and they reversed course, climbing toward the 4th floor instead of escaping downward. Grace Mitchell heard the distant sounds of commotion from inside the school building, crashes, moans, and something that might have been gunfire. Jake pressed his face to the chemistry lab window, looking down at the parking lot. "Something's happening in there," he said. "The infected are moving toward the noise." Grace grabbed the radio. "Marcus, this is Grace. Are you in the school?" Static answered her, then a different voice, "Jennifer Cole, negative, Grace. We're at the hospital and we've got a situation. The high school extraction is delayed. You need to hold your position." Grace's stomach sank, but then she looked at the parking lot again. Most of the infected had wandered toward the school's main building, drawn by whatever chaos was happening inside. The path to the parking lot was clearer than it had been hours ago. She looked at Jake, then at the other students. "We can't wait anymore," she said. "The parking lot's clearing out. If we're going to make a run for it, it has to be now." Melissa stood up, fear and determination mixing on her face. "Where would we even go?" Grace thought of the radio transmissions she'd heard, the mentions of the fire station and the community center. The community center on Maple Street. They said it's fortified and has survivors. It's about a mile from here. Jake grabbed the makeshift weapons they'd created, bottles filled with chemicals that could burn or create smoke, lengths of pipe, anything that could be used to defend themselves. "Then let's do it," he said. "Because I'm not dying in a high school chemistry lab." Grace pushed open the window, and the cool night air rushed in, carrying with it the moans of the infected and the uncertainty of what lay ahead in the darkness. The fourth floor of Pinewood General Hospital was the pediatric ward, and Marcus Thompson tried not to look at the small beds as they barricaded themselves in the nurse's station. Infected filled the stairwell below them, a writhing mass of the dead climbing steadily upward, drawn by the noise and scent of the living. "We're trapped," Pete Walsh said, stating the obvious as he pushed a filing cabinet against the door. Marcus's mind raced through options, each one more desperate than the last. Then Rebecca spoke up, her voice surprisingly steady despite their circumstances. "There's a skybridge on this floor. It connects to the medical office building next door. We used it to transport patients between facilities." Marcus turned to her. "Is it secure?" Becca shook her head. "I don't know. I haven't been over there since this started, but it's our only option unless you want to fight through 50 of those things in the stairwell." David Reeves checked his ammunition, 4 rounds left. "We don't have enough firepower for that fight. The bridge is our best shot." They moved quickly through the pediatric ward, and Marcus tried to ignore the small handprints on the windows and the abandoned toys scattered across the floor. The skybridge entrance was locked, but Danny Cruz made short work of it with his fire axe. The glass-enclosed bridge stretched across to the medical office building, suspended 3 stories above the street. Through the transparent walls, they could see the devastation below, fires burning in the distance, abandoned vehicles, and infected wandering through the darkness like lost souls. Grace Mitchell went first down the fire escape, her legs shaking as she descended the metal stairs. The parking lot was not as clear as it had appeared from above, infected still wandered among the cars, but their numbers were reduced. Jake followed her, then Melissa and the other 5 students, each moving as quietly as possible. Grace reached the ground and pressed herself against the school's brick wall, her makeshift weapon, a heavy metal rod from the chemistry lab, gripped in both hands. The infected janitor, Mr. Williams, shuffled past just feet away, oblivious to their presence in the shadows. Grace held her breath until he passed, then motioned for the group to move toward the parking lot's exit. They wove between cars, staying low and quiet. Grace spotted an older pickup truck with keys still in the ignition. Someone had abandoned it in panic. "Can anyone drive?" she whispered. Jake nodded. "I've got my license." They piled into the truck bed and cab, and Jake turned the key, praying it would start. The engine coughed, sputtered, and died. An infected turned toward the sound, then another. "Try again," Grace urged, watching more of them begin to approach. Jake pumped the gas and turned the key again. This time the engine roared to life, and he threw it into gear, flooring the accelerator. The truck lurched forward, sideswiping infected and crashing through the parking lot gate. They were free of the school, but the streets ahead were unknown territory, and the community center was still miles away through a town full of the dead. Marcus and his team crossed the skybridge and entered the medical office building to find it eerily quiet. The infected presence here was minimal, a few wandering the hallways, easily avoided or quietly dispatched. They made their way to the ground floor and found a side exit that led to an alley. The fire engine was blocks away, but the police cruiser was closer, parked just 2 streets over. "We move quick and quiet," David said. "Jennifer, take point. Danny and Pete, protect our medical personnel. Marcus and I will cover the rear." They slipped into the night, moving through alleys and behind buildings, avoiding the main streets where infected congregated. Rebecca stayed close to Dr. Graves, her heart pounding with every shadow and sound. They were 1 block from the cruiser when they heard an engine roaring through the night, a pickup truck careening down the main street, infected in pursuit. "That's kids in that truck," Jennifer said, recognizing young faces in the vehicle. Those might be the high school students, Marcus realized. The truck's headlights swept across their position as it took a corner too fast, clipping a parked car and spinning out. It came to rest against a storefront, steam rising from the damaged hood. The students scrambled out, but infected were converging from all directions, drawn by the crash. Marcus made a split-second decision. "We can't leave them. Everyone, with me." The rescue team charged toward the crashed truck, weapons ready, shouting to draw the infected's attention away from the kids. Grace looked up to see adults running toward them through the chaos, fighting off the dead, and she felt a surge of hope. They weren't alone anymore. Someone had come for them after all, and together, they might actually have a chance to survive this nightmare that had consumed their town in less than 24 hours. Marcus Thompson swung his axe in a wide arc, clearing a path through the infected as Grace Mitchell and the other students ran toward the police cruiser. "Get in! Now!" David Reeves shouted, firing his last rounds to cover their retreat. The street had become a killing zone, infected pouring from every direction, drawn by the noise and chaos. Jennifer Cole jumped into the driver's seat while Rebecca Walsh pushed students into the back. "We can't fit everyone," Grace yelled as more infected closed in. Marcus spotted the fire engine 2 blocks away, exactly where they'd left it. "Jake, take 3 students and run for that fire engine. Keys are in the ignition. Follow us to the community center on Maple Street." Jake nodded, grabbing Melissa and 2 others, and they sprinted through the darkness. Marcus, Danny, and Pete formed a rear guard, their weapons rising and falling as they fought their way to the cruiser. Dr. Graves stumbled, and an infected grabbed his coat, pulling him backward. Pete's Halligan bar crushed the creature's skull, and they dragged the doctor forward. Marcus dove into the passenger seat as Jennifer floored the accelerator, the cruiser's tires squealing. Behind them, the fire engine's air horn blasted, and Marcus saw Jake behind the wheel, the massive vehicle plowing through infected like bowling pins. Both vehicles raced through Pinewood's devastated streets, headlights cutting through the darkness, infected grasping at them from all sides but unable to stop their momentum. The community center's defenders heard the engines approaching and saw 2 vehicles speeding down Maple Street with a horde in pursuit. Tyler Jenkins stood on the roof with Linda Vasquez, and his blood ran cold at the size of the mob following the rescue vehicles. "They're bringing half the town's infected right to our doorstep," someone shouted in panic. Linda's voice cut through the fear. "Then we deal with it together. Everyone to your positions." "Tyler, are those defenses ready?" Tyler had spent hours rigging motion-activated lights, noisemakers, and reinforced barricades. "As ready as they'll ever be," he replied. The police cruiser skidded into the parking lot, and people poured out. The fire engine followed, Jake expertly backing it against the community center's entrance to form an additional barricade. Marcus helped everyone inside while David and Jennifer prepared for the onslaught. "We've got maybe 60 seconds before they're on top of us," David said, checking his empty pistol and tossing it aside, picking up a baseball bat instead. The survivors formed a defensive line as the infected horde approached, dozens of them, maybe over 100, driven by insatiable hunger. Tyler activated his defenses, and lights blazed to life, temporarily disorienting the front ranks of infected. Speakers blared with recorded sirens, and some of the creatures veered toward the sound, buying precious seconds. But there were too many, and they kept coming. Marcus stood shoulder to shoulder with people he'd met just hours ago, and he realized that despite everything, the horror, the death, the end of the world as they knew it, humanity's greatest strength remained unchanged. They stood together. "For everyone we've lost," he shouted, raising his axe. "For everyone we're protecting. Hold the line." The infected crashed into their defensive positions, and the battle began. Grace fought beside her rescuers, no longer a frightened teenager but a survivor who'd found her strength. Rebecca used her medical knowledge to identify the most effective kill spots, calling out instructions while wielding a scalpel with surgical precision. Tyler's mechanical traps funneled the infected into kill zones where groups of defenders could focus their attacks. Jake used the fire engine's water cannon, the pressure strong enough to knock infected off their feet, buying time for others to finish them. Kevin and Amanda worked together, covering each other's blind spots. Dr. Graves, despite his age, fought with the determination of someone who'd seen too much death in one day to accept any more. The battle raged for what felt like hours but was likely only minutes, and slowly, impossibly, the tide began to turn. As the last infected fell, silence descended over the community center parking lot. Survivors stood among the carnage, breathing hard, covered in blood and exhaustion, but alive. Marcus looked around at the faces illuminated by Tyler's lights: 40 people from the community center, 8 students from the high school, 4 medical personnel from the hospital, and the rescue team. 52 souls who had survived the impossible. Dawn began to break over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Linda Vasquez climbed onto the fire engine's hood, her voice carrying across the parking lot. Today, we learned that the world we knew is gone. We lost friends, family, and neighbors. But we also learned something more important. We learned that together, we're stronger than anything that can come at us. This community center is now our home, our fortress, and our future. We protect each other, we support each other, and we survive together. Grace stood next to Marcus, watching the sunrise, and for the first time since the nightmare began, she felt something other than fear. She felt hope. The zombie outbreak had taken everything familiar and safe, but it had also revealed the unbreakable strength of people who refused to give up, who fought for each other, and who would continue fighting for as long as it took. In the shadow of zombies, humanity had found its light, and that light would not be extinguished. Not today, not ever, because they stood together, and together, they would survive whatever came next.